Before I get into this video, I need to clarify something. I am not against transgender people. It is a First Amendment right and humanitarian freedom to express yourself as the gender you identify as. That being said, the main core of the issues in this video really need covering. Some points just flat out being disingenuous. There are seeds of good ideas here, good points scattered about. However, the wording and outright disingenuous points make this video a lot worse than it should have been. That being said, let's roll the intro. So here we are, and we are discussing Neko Koda. Koda, formerly a member of the slideshow commentary community, and formerly known as Kainu or the Dark Commentator. She is known for a few different videos and incidents, but she's most known for one thing. She is a massive trans advocate and a comrade in forward progress. That being said, Neko Koda is also known to not have the best arguments. Enter Neko Koda's video, The Basics of Trans Issues, LGBT 101. This video suffers from a few problems, and as mentioned in the cold open, there are seeds of good ideas here. The execution of said ideas is really poor. We will be going over this video not because, oh my god, a pro-trans video, kill it with fire, ooh. We are going over this because this video has flaws in the arguments that Koda is presenting. Pretty glaring ones, to be honest. Allow me to discuss why.
So I'm actually going to be trying to use my more feminine voice for this video because I've been voice training for a while and I think I found somewhere where I can comfortably keep my voice for a while. So tell me what you guys think, if you want me to keep using this or if you want me to go back to my old voice. Either or works for me. Thank you.
That is cool and all, but honey, get on my level.
I've gotten the criticism that I'm too abrasive and aggressive in the way I tackle trans topics, that perhaps all some people need to become trans allies is a simple, calm, and direct explanation of what transgenderism is, and what the trans experience is. This is also a series I've wanted to do for a while, so two birds, one stone. In this video, I'm going to be explaining the basics of trans people, their struggles, and the harm transphobia does to us.
Well, this is a good start, well-rounded, bringing some discussion to the table. This should go smoothly. This is not gonna go smoothly.
I'm not here to demonize anybody. If there's something in this video you didn't know beforehand or didn't fully understand, that's fine. We all gotta learn sometime. I simply ask that you leave your attack helicopter beams at the door and approach this video with an open mind to hear out my perspective and experiences as a trans woman.
I am not here to demonize anybody. Keep this in mind for later. This will be important.
Tell you something, you don't wanna fuck with me. I'ma be number one, cause bitch is all that I can.
So I want to lay out some definitions as I feel a lot of negativity about trans people stems from misconceptions. Gender is a method of social identification. When someone makes a claim about their gender identity, all they're saying is that they prefer a certain set of label and pronouns. For example, when I say that I'm a woman, I mean that I prefer the label of woman and using she/her pronouns. I'm not claiming that I was born with a vagina, uterus, or XX chromosomes. I mean that purely, in a social sense, I'm a woman.
This is a difficult thing to tackle, and is another thing I want to pin for later because it ties into another segment of her video, a sort of have your cake and eat it too situation.
Which, when we compare myself to a cisgender woman, if we look purely socially and not biologically, we fulfill the same purpose. We both use the same labels and have the same pronoun.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Koda, what exactly is the purpose of a woman? I don't know, Koda, that statement leaves a lot of wiggle room for interpretation. Are you talking about being a caregiver? Are we talking about being a bottom in sexual situations? Are we talking about making a sandwich, for God's sakes? What do you mean by you fulfill the same purpose as a woman? casually leaving the door open for sexism, are we?
However, let's now talk sex. Sex is what I had with your mom last night. Sex is the biological aspects of male and female. This is where aspects like chromosome, hormones, and genitals come into play. Transgender people do not deny the sex they were born as. I do not deny the fact that I was assigned male at birth. However, when we talk socially, my biology plays no factor. Talking to friends or colleagues, the only thing that really matters is how I socially identify. Now, if I were to go to the doctors for a checkup of sorts, I would disclose my sex assigned at birth, as there it is relevant.
I would say in certain social situations that it would be ideal to disclose your trans identity if they aren't already aware, especially in sexual environments where, knowing your partner's history is a very prevalent thing. This point will also be tied into a later part of this video.
Now, I hope we can clarify that when I say trans women are women, I mean in the social sense and not the biological sense.
I feel like this will also become very prevalent later and possibly quite ironic.
There's a lot more I can go into, like non-binary and xenogenders, however, I want this video to cover the absolute basics. Another term I want to clear up is gender dysphoria. A lot of people hold the idea that all trans people must suffer from gender dysphoria or they are not trans. For those who don't know, gender dysphoria is a term that describes the sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. Trans people do not need to have this sense of unease to be transgender. Some trans folk could prefer to identify as another gender while not disliking their gender assigned at birth. Some trans people may have gender euphoria from identifying and presenting as a different gender while not feeling any dysphoria. Some trans people may have dysphoria, but you don't need dysphoria to be trans.
Okay, so I was doing research into this a little more, and my findings kinda raise more questions to Koda than anything else. Going with psychology.org and the APA, they do state that you do not need any dysphoria to be transgender. However, in the APA, more specifically, it states, whilst trans people don't need gender dysphoria, some reasons why they do transition is stuff like hormone therapy, counseling, medical procedures, lack of social support, or not being able to express their gender identity, which, are things people with gender dysphoria go through. Then, we also have statements from this PDF from the Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, stating that gender dysphoria is a formal diagnosis and psychiatrically classified. It also states that prior review and certification are required. Camera guy, are you following me on this? Okay, here we go. Here is another article by the APA. It states that for both adults and children who are trans, a team of doctors would assess individuals through gender identity development services and gender dysphoria clinics. Now let's go back to psychology.org, where in an entirely separate article again, which goes over a list of criteria for gender dysphoria, it is stated that the condition can affect social, occupational, or otherwise. The key word being social. What does Koda bring up earlier?
Gender is a method of social identification. When someone makes a claim about their gender identity, all they're saying is that they prefer a certain set of label and pronouns. For example, when I say that I'm a woman, I mean that I prefer the label of woman in using she/her pronouns. I'm not claiming that I was born with a vagina, uterus, or XX chromosomes. I mean that purely, in a social sense, I'm a woman.
That a lot of the transgender stuff is purely social. And for the double whammy, the creme de la creme, if you will, we have Stat News stating, and I quote, "The diagnosis of gender dysphoria has become a requirement for receiving medically necessary gender-affirming care and is required for an insurer to pay for medically necessary care." Which means, given the provided evidence, doctors are finding out if those who are seeking transitional medical care have dysphoria, which we can deduce from this that those seeking medical care and are getting medical care have gender dysphoria. Now, if you are still boggled by the idea of how a lot of these articles say different things about each other, don't worry. I too have a massive migraine cluster headache and want to blow my head off. This can also be a sign we need to do more research to have a clearer picture of gender dysphoria and transgenderism. That being said, I don't think it is accurate to say that you don't need gender dysphoria to be trans, when that is contradicted by .org websites backed by science and confirming news sources that say otherwise. This also isn't going into the gender euphoria aspect, which here is some common sense that is required. If someone is identifying as a gender they are not assigned as at birth, then experience pleasure and happiness from being that gender that they identify as, it is safe to say that individual is also someone with gender dysphoria. That is due to a very clear preference for an identified gender they would rather be, that they do not experience with their sex assigned at birth. I mean, really think about it for a moment. If you try something out and you like that thing, going back to your average day-to-day life without it would probably make you feel a little discontent. There is even more I could bring up to the table. However, it would require a whole video on its own to go over. Let's continue from here.
Everybody knows that I'm a G. Everybody knows that.
Now, I am aware that misgendering trans folk has become a meme or joke of sorts.
20-year-old grown-ass man Malden.
Grimsy, did you just use the wrong fucking pronouns?
What are you gonna do, shit your fucking diaper, dude? Jesus Christ.
But I wish to make the case that misgendering perpetuates a negative stigma that can cause trans folk to be mistreated, abused, and murdered. I know these are heavy topics and these claims seem outlandish, but I simply ask that you hear me out as I'll have sources for everything I'm telling.
Wait. Hold on a minute. Misgendering a trans person can lead to them being abused, mistreated, or murdered? I'm completely not following this correlation and don't see why you couldn't just go over the dysphoria that trans people can get from misgendering or how it can affect the mental states of trans people, but now I'm intrigued.
Transgender people are over 4 times more likely than cisgender people to be victims of violent crimes. Transgender and gender non-binary teens face a greater risk of sexual assault in schools that prevent them from using bathrooms or locker rooms consistent with their gender identity. There is no evidence that letting trans people use public facilities that align with their gender identity increases safety risks.
Okay, so here is another section that has evidence that kind of breaks the foundations of this point. Let's first go over that there is no evidence that letting trans people use the bathrooms of their identified sex can lead to violence. And well, it's a little heartbreaking when going over it. Now, and this is going a bit off script, when I say this, I am not generalizing the entire community, but rather this is meant to give sort of a light on a much broader spectrum of the situation. Here is a full article that reported a case where a trans girl in a school setting has actually raped a cis girl. The 9th grade student had been sexually abused by, in her words, a boy in a skirt, who is a trans person who identified as gender fluid. The article also states that the case happened in May of 2021. However, it was reportedly not disclosed at the time, as an important law conveniently for trans students being able to go into their identified gender's bathroom was about to be passed. The school board also reportedly denied the act ever happening. A superintendent, Scott Zinger, said, "I think it's important to keep our perspective on this. We've heard it several times tonight from our public speakers, but the predator transgender student or person simply does not exist." I shouldn't have to state that this is incredibly dangerous to say. It's a statement that is so devoid of understanding of human nature that it's disgusting. The fact of the matter is, anyone can hurt people and anyone can be hurt. There are no exceptions because of gender identity. Anyone can hurt people. Anyone. The trans girl who committed the act would be placed on house arrest before transferring to another school. Now, we also have statistics from a document PDF from 2020 that goes over trans offending rates, which isn't so black and white either. it shows shades of gray. It goes off of already incarcerated individuals who have gone through transitioning. This number could be more or less with those who haven't fully transitioned, but bear with me. Of the comparison as calculated by March/April of 2019, the statistics state that 13,234 sex offenders out of 78,781 men in prison, around 16.8%. 125 sex offenders out of 3,812 women in prisons, around 3.3%. And 76 sex offenders out of 129 trans women, around 58.9%. This also isn't even going over cases such as these where cis inmates were claimed to have been sexually assaulted by their trans counterparts. The following are articles pertaining to this. Now I feel like I need to make some clarifications. No, this should not stop trans people from using the bathrooms or be/placed in the facilities of their identified gender. The public should also not be afraid of trans people because of these statistics or articles. No one should use these as justifications of violence towards trans people either. However, it is important to acknowledge public bathrooms are very nasty and dangerous places already. You don't need some trans sex offender to prove that. Any cis one would be proof enough. That being said, to say there is no evidence, especially in a public restroom, well, that's a flat out lie and is completely disingenuous. Anyone can hurt people, but that shouldn't prevent progress either.
What is the trans panic defense? It is effectively legal to murder trans and other queer individuals in this country by invoking gay and trans panic defenses. These defenses are arguments used by defendants that insist that violent behavior was a natural response to discovering by surprise that the victim was a part of the LGBTQ community. Gay panic refers to a situation in which a heterosexual individual charged with a violent crime against a homosexual individual where they lost control and reacted violently because of an unwanted sexual advance that was made upon them. And no, this doesn't end at rape or groping. If a gay person hits on you, you're allowed to legally murder them.
No. No, that is absolutely untrue. Just by the nature of the trans/gay panic defense alone, you shot yourself in the foot. Here is the core issue. The trans/gay panic defense is merely a defense. This is something a lawyer would use to defend someone from prosecution. Key word is defend someone from prosecution, meaning that the person would be prosecuted and can/would still be charged with murder. At most, it would lighten someone's sentence. A big leap over the you can get away with it mentality. Koda also strips the fact that of these cases, a lot of these individual cases are when, mommy and daddy are in a loving relationship, and then mommy whips out her big fat femoid cock and gets controlled Z'd out of existence. Not to mention, here is a real kicker to this claim. The gay/trans panic defense isn't legal in every state. The following states are where it is illegal to use the gay panic defense: California, Colorado, Connecticut, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, and Washington. And before you say, well, that's only 16 or so states where gay panic is illegal, that doesn't mean in all of the states you can't get away with murdering a trans person. Au contraire, my friend. Let's make a nice quick montage of, you guessed it, more articles. Articles of people getting arrested in states that don't legalize the gay panic defense. A bonus bonus video from a news station in Toledo, Ohio.
A man is in police custody tonight for the murder of a transgender woman that happened 5 years ago. Antonio Scott Jr. is charged with murder and the shooting death of JoJo Stryker. The shooting happening in February of 2017. Officers found Stryker in a vacant garage on Austin in North Toledo. She was pronounced dead at the scene. TPD says DNA evidence led them to the arrest of Scott.
I think it's safe to say what Koda is saying is wrong here, don't you?
Breen says he was unaware that Laud was trans when he accompanied her to a motel. He claims that upon discovering her penis, the two engaged in an altercation. He then choked her until she stopped moving and left the room.
Well, you see, that is a massively fucked up case right there, but doesn't that say right there that this case is in the Philippines? When did a case in the Philippines equate to, yes, you can get away with killing trans people in America? This wouldn't be a problem if you weren't citing earlier an American lawyer defense. The Philippines is a completely different country. You can't just Better Call Saul in the Philippines, Koda.
Perpetuating the idea that trans people aren't the gender they identify as is harmful and dangerous.
Oh yeah, I bet you forgot at this point too. All of these sources about horrible things happening to transgender people. Yeah, Koda brings that up to say if you misgender someone, you are advocating for harm or violence against those people. The entire time, this was all for Koda to poison the well. Which, you know, nice opinion and all, but why did you go for well poisoning over, oh, I don't know, explaining why misgendering trans people is harmful? You know, that thing that is in the title of your video? The big title of your segment, you know?
It looks questionable to me.
Remember when Koda said she was gonna make a calm video explaining trans issues? Yeah, this isn't exactly a calm explanation. If anything, it's actually very extreme. We shoot from 0 to 60 in seconds. Slow your horses, cowgirl.
It's what forces trans people to go into bathrooms that do not match their gender identity, which can cause them to be harassed and assaulted.
I think we've already gone over the fact the public bathrooms are sketchy places regardless of who's going in, but, you know, go off.
It's what justifies laws like the trans panic defense. They see trans women as creepy men, so revealing that you are trans to someone you are flirting with can open you up to being legally murdered.
First of all, not a law. A lawyer's defense. It's a tactic used to lighten sentences and has no guarantee of absolving anything, much less any charges. Second of all, not legally murder. No one can legally be murdered unless in self-defense, and even then that doesn't apply to every state, and that wouldn't work in this case either. These people are attackers, not defenders. Koda, stop poisoning the well. The closest Irish village just got a potato famine because of you.
I know that sexual advances can be uncomfortable and awkward, but they do not justify murder. Especially considering oftentimes when I see the trans panic defense invoked, it's not because the trans person pushed any boundaries, it's because the person was uncomfortable to finding out that they were trans and then immediately jumped to violence instead of kindly rejecting them like a normal adult.
Here's a fair point. A normal person would not resort to violence or murder in this situation. These are straight people who resorted to the worst action possible. However, again, nobody is getting away with it. Citation fucking strongly needed to prove that point.
It's what forces trans women into men's prisons, which puts them at a higher risk for abuse and assault.
Well, again, we've gone over how that is a two-way street when it comes to prison violence. Again, this shouldn't remove trans people from their facilities of their identified gender. But prisons, like public bathrooms, are nasty and sketchy places. Anyone can hurt people.
If trans folk were seen as the gender they identify as, they would be allowed in the spaces that match their gender, so they could use public restrooms and not be harassed, so they wouldn't be forced into men's prisons where they have a higher chance at being assaulted. The reason I'm telling you this is to give you a more full and complete picture as to the harm of misgendering. It doesn't stop at just one person. It helps perpetuates a narrative that causes trans women to be harassed and murdered.
Here's the problem. You have not once gone over how these situations are being perpetuated by misgendering. You threw a bunch of statistics and very horrible events into the pot and then said, You see this? You are causing this. And Koda, for the love of God.
Explain.
Citation needed. How does misgendering perpetuate these things? Because as far as I'm aware, words, while they can sting and make people have an emotional response, that doesn't equate to now you are perpetuating the narrative that gets trans people killed. The random guy on the street who misgenders a trans person will more than likely not be for trans violence. And if someone is gonna hurt a trans person, that is something they would do with or without a narrative. Murderers will murder with their own justifications.
Now, I'm not saying that everyone who misgenders a trans person wants them dead. However, a lot of these horrific acts are fueled by the narrative that trans folk are not the gender they identify as, a narrative that gets pushed when you misgender trans folk.
But Koda, didn't you say earlier that purely socially, trans women are women? It appears that Neko Koda has created for herself a contradiction, as she now talks about the narrative being pushed that trans people are not the gender they identify as. Koda is now presented in a situation where she can't have her cake and eat it too. If it's purely socially, then the narrative she claims would be true. However, by the same token, if the narrative is false, then transgender people don't just use the pronouns and terms for social use. She put herself in her own logical headlock. That being said, let me give some advice on how to avoid such a situation. Don't let societal norms keep you from being you. The reason why a lot of this is talked about is because society has put the two sexes into respective roles. If you, however, remove those norms and pick the roles and norms that fit you, then we don't need to have the argument of social or biological, because now you are just free to be you, without society's roles and norms controlling you. You can now express yourself and show the mark of who you are.
The justification for a lot of these acts would be gone if we treated trans folk as the gender they identified as. It isn't just name calling, it isn't just a playful insult, it perpetuates a stigma that costs trans folk their dignity, health, and welfare. Even if you're doing it to piss somebody off, it still perpetuates that stigma. I know it can feel like I'm blaming you directly for these acts with the points I'm making, but trust me, I'm not. I don't think misgendering someone means that you think they should be murdered. However, it is still important to know the full implications with the words that you are using. If you did not know before, I can only hope you take my perspective into consideration the next time you want to misgender someone in any context.
Again, none of these situations directly prove misgendering a trans person leads to violence. The stigma or narrative wouldn't make a killer. A killer will kill for themselves, not others. They will kill, narrative or not.
Top of the class, no rivalry. That cool, he don't wanna fight with me. Good guy, but I move violently.
Some people are currently under the impression that transgender folk have full legal rights. However, anti-transgender legislation has actually been on the rise. A few examples of those bills are at least 35 bills that would prohibit transgender youth from being able to access best practice age-appropriate gender-affirming medical care, at least 69 bills that would prohibit transgender youth, and in some cases college students, from participating in sports consistent with their gender identity, at least 43 bills that would allow people to assert religious belief as justification for failing to abide by the laws or provide services to people with whom they disapprove, and at least 15 bills that would prohibit transgender people from having access to the restrooms or locker rooms consistent with their gender identity.
So this is going to be a fucking mouthful already, but we are going to dive into the legislation. Now, the bills pertaining to religious beliefs playing a factor in how trans people are treated and receive services, that's a big problem, I do agree. The same can be said for the 15 bills that go over trans people using the restrooms of their identified gender. The laws against trans kids getting the medical treatment they need, that is a mixed bag. Trans kids shouldn't not be able to express themselves. It is, as I said before, a humanitarian freedom. Therapy and counseling shouldn't be denied either, as well as eventual access to HRT and surgery. However, the key word is eventual. I don't see a kid being able to fully comprehend exactly the situation they are going into 100%. There is a lot about transitional surgery to process, and whilst the surgeries are reversible, they are not 100% reversible. We don't yet have the technology to 100% give trans people fully functional genitalia of their cis counterparts, and the alterations are very drastic. So to say that a kid or teen who can't even fully process consent yet can just decide outright to go through with the surgery and understand the repercussions, I don't buy that. I buy that kids are aware of their identity and should be free to express themselves and can be checked and receive care for their gender dysphoria, but the surgery and HRT, that's something I advocate for post coming of age. Let's also dive into the transgender sports bills. This is something that also ties into Koda saying that it's only in the social sense. Let's also dive into the transgender sports bills. This is something that also ties into Koda saying that it's only in the social sense. If that is the case, well, major problem. Trans people in sports is a heavily biological topic. Let's go over the case of Leah Thomas. You see, Koda is mad at this guy named Ween, in this specific situation at least, because Ween acknowledges the biological aspects of Leah Thomas, that she was assigned male at birth. And a little known fact, HRT can weaken male muscle structure, but not enough to make her completely comparable to a woman in physicality. So the result is essentially Leah gets a lot of gold medals in a very one-sided way. Now, Koda flat out states that Ween is transphobic because of this, saying that he is implying that Leah isn't a woman. The argument presented is that Leah has an unfair advantage due to our rather underdeveloped methods of transitioning, which is acknowledging the biological aspects of a trans person, something Koda stated earlier that trans people do acknowledge. So now we are again met with the having your cake and eating it too situation. That being said, I think it's very obvious where my thoughts on the trans women in sports lie. That doesn't make Leah any less of a woman, obviously. And I would like to advocate for trans women in sports, but clearly we must develop better methods of transitioning for trans people, especially for trans athletes, because as it stands with current methods, we can't fully alter someone's sex, at least not yet. I am hopeful one day this process will be streamlined and issues like this won't happen again.
If you all would like, my sources would be linked down below. However, I think my case has been made. Trans folks still have many laws passed that actively discriminate them and put them into unsafe positions. The point of this and the previous section is to paint a fuller picture of the experiences of trans folk in society and how they actually get treated in the real world.
Painting a fuller picture by actively contradicting yourself and using the Philippines to say that murdering trans people is legal. This picture is going to turn out PogChamp very clearly.
Bad guys better go hide and seek, and when I find you, go quietly. Bang, then I get fired.
A common criticism of the LGBT as a whole is that they are oversensitive. I've gotten this criticism myself, however I wish to explain a few things regarding it. LGBT people face a lot of bullshit in general. So I don't exactly blame LGBT people for responding the way they do when someone comes in aggressive or with fake points that extrapolate small issues to paint a community with a broad brush.
People bringing in fake points to paint a picture with a broad brush. First of all, citation needed. What fake points are you referring to? Second off, paint a picture with a broad brush? Girl, what the fuck have you been doing this whole time then? A lot of this is quite literally painting a picture with a broad brush, especially with the misgendering segment.
However, I will say I should be more charitable towards some people. As much as I throw shade at Ween, I don't think he's actually homophobic. I think he has a limited perspective on a large community. I haven't spoken to Grimsy, so I cannot speak to his intentions. This is why, going forward, whenever I debate topics regarding the LGBT and the person's in someone like Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro, like someone known for being hateful, I will be a lot more charitable and treat the debate more like a discussion rather than a takedown.
Well, time will tell with this video if Koda upholds that or not. I present a lot that goes against her claims, so let's see how the cookie crumbles.
However, I want to present a perspective from both sides. One side thinks they're building a nuanced view of a community, and the other sees the first side as making points that are very surface level or over-extrapolated. I will, going forward, try to bridge a gap between these sides to pick out people who are misinformed and push them further to our side, and only be aggressive to those who are genuinely hateful. We should be calling out bigotry, I don't disagree with that, but we also need to remember that there is a fine line between being hateful and not knowing nuances. Sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference, but we need to find ways to pull people on the fence towards being trans allies while not justifying any bigoted or hateful behavior. It's because that line is so blurred that I feel I've come off as more abrasive or aggressive in general regarding trans issues, cause, let's be honest here, it can be hard to tell when someone's being good faith and when someone just wants to be an asshole. I think this is something that the other side should know as well. It can sometimes be difficult to differentiate between someone who's just ignorant and someone who's hateful, especially in the modern day of dog whistles and fluff language. I don't want to sound like a fence sitter here, but like it or not, there are people who can be seen as bigoted or transphobic who could be potentially pulled to our side. I used to be transphobic myself, and fucking look at me now. It's a difficult line that's difficult to draw, especially considering how poisonous online discourse can be.
I'm glad to see an effort is being made to be more charitable with what people are truly trying to say. I wish that generosity still applied to Ween, though, because you do still paint what he says as transphobic rather than the nuance you yourself are striving for. But at the end of the day, that's all she wrote for this video. Koda's video is ripe with problems, disingenuously presenting arguments with seeds of good ideas. Obviously, her pro-trans take isn't a bad one. I just wish Koda presented her arguments better. A complete missed opportunity was made with the misgendering segment. I was hoping she would actually go over how misgendering makes trans people feel and how it plays into dysphoria. Psychology is very fascinating, but instead we got well poisoning that didn't need to happen. Statistics that make this discussion very not basic. and overshadow the overarching point. That being said, I want to tell you guys something, especially those of you who are trans who watch my content. I hope you do reach this point in this video because this is important for you to hear. Regardless of Koda's or my video, regardless of whether you agree or disagree, regardless even of what I have said before, the takeaway of this video is not for people to be against you. You are valid. What took place here is just a debate between scrubs on the internet. That doesn't change the fact you deserve respect and the freedom to express yourself. The freedom for you yourself to speak your mind, to be you. Because at the end of the day, it's just my video and it's just Koda's video. None of this will ever change the mark of who you are. With that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you on the flip side. My balls! Here's a fair point.